What is one of the most common conditions you might experience postpartum? In fact, there are over 3 million cases of women per year who are suffering of this condition. If you guessed postpartum depression, you're right. Postpartum depression, commonly referred to as PPD, can make you think things like, is this normal? Am I a bad mom? Why am I having these thoughts? Did I make a mistake? Today, we learn from mental health advocate, entrepreneur, and mama, Sasha Nicole, and her severe experience with postpartum depression. You'll learn from her struggle that it's important to speak up when these thoughts come instead of staying silent. Now, you should know that her experience was a very hard one, and she doesn't hold back. So, if you're not in a safe place right now for this conversation, maybe save this one for later and go check out last week's episode. If you're sticking around, by the end of this episode, you will be empowered by a mama whose strength was so impressive that she created a nonprofit organization called Partum Evolution, dedicated to women of color experiencing postpartum depression. The only way that we can normalize something like PPD is to share stories like Sasha's, so you know how to navigate the fear and the anger that may arise, and you know that you are not crazy. You just need a little support. You're listening to the Mamas in Training podcast, giving aspiring and expecting mamas guidance and community from moms who have been there. I'm your host, Jessica Lorian. However, I'm not yet a mom. An autoimmune disease delayed my journey into motherhood, so I've made it my mission while I heal to learn with you all about motherhood. So together, we can be as prepared as possible. And postpartum depression is one condition that we can never fully prepare for. However, there are support systems that we can put into place ahead of time and ways that we can advocate for ourselves in the moment that will largely diminish the experience of PPD. Let's learn from Sasha Nicole how she dug herself out of a severe case of postpartum depression. This episode is sponsored by Boom Boom Blowout Bodysuits. Picture this. You're out for a day of errands with your baby. They've already soaked their fresh diaper and the extras you brought, but after a quick change, they're finally sleeping. So you grab yourself a quick coffee, but then they wake up screaming. So you pick them up, and what is on your hands? It's a blowout. There goes the last diaper, the baby's clothes, and your own clothes. Well, with Boom Boom Blowout Bodysuits, diaper blowouts are covered. Literally, the entire back of each bodysuit contains waterproof polyurethane laminate fabric that is bonded between 2 layers of super soft, unbleached organic cotton, making blowouts no longer a stress. Trust me, I saw it in action, and it's amazing how strong these bodysuits are. So this Mother's Day, treat yourself to less stress and let Boom Boom Baby Company cover that mess by clicking the link in the show notes and using the code MAMASPOD25. That's MAMASPOD25 for 25% off at checkout, because nobody has time for a blowout. And now here is Sasha.
So first off, when I had my daughter, I went into an emergency C-section. Her vitals started dropping, and so I was completely unprepared to go through that experience from a C-section, because in my mind, I had this idea that I would have this vaginal birth of what I considered to be normal delivery. So that was my first state of shock in going through that experience. And then in having her, I remember when they put her on my chest, and just instantly not feeling these elated feelings of joy, that feeling that you see in the movies or the TV where they say, you know, you'll be so happy, it'll change your life, it'll be the best feeling in the world. And I didn't have that feeling. I didn't have that moment, and that moment, you know, never came for me, and I wanted to have that moment. And so I thought that it would maybe come later, that I would just have that aha, like, oh my God, like this beacon of light that I now have. And that wasn't there. And instead, I more so felt like this feeling of obligation of like, okay, now she's here. This is my journey begins. I'm supposed to do certain things because I'm her mother. And so as I went home, I had a good job. I had just got my master's degree. I was at home, was working from home with a good company, and I actually went back to work as soon as my 8 weeks were up.
Mm.
So as soon as my 8 weeks were up, I was pretty much back in the office, and then I was able to get more teleworking options. But it was an immediate thing. And then her father traveled a lot, so he was not at the house with me a lot at all. And my family, my father and his wife didn't live far from me, but my father, being a military father,
Mm.
was very hands off in his approach of help and feeling as though, well, it's your child, like, you take care of her type of attitude. It wasn't a communal type of support in terms of, where you see other families kind of gather together. I didn't really have a lot of support at all. My friends at the time didn't understand the relation of being a mom. I was one of the first people out of my friendship circles to have a child, and so there was no relatability there, and that it really
Mm.
changed the dynamic of my friendships. My mother at the time lived in Seattle, so I didn't have her as a support system. And as I mentioned with my father and his wife tried to be there in terms of just talking to me or providing any insight that she could, but there was really not a lot of support surrounding me at that time in my
Mm.
life. So I was very much alone. And then her father was from a different state, was from North Carolina. And so we lived in Virginia at the time. And so his family was not close to me. So I spent a lot of time by myself completely.
Mm.
It felt incredibly lonely. It felt incredibly overwhelming. And I felt like I had made the biggest mistake of my life. I didn't know that I needed that type of support, that going in now, if having another child, that I would create that community. And I
Right.
just didn't it didn't dawn on me at that time that that community was needed, that family was needed, that support was like. I just kind of felt like I'm an adult, I've gone to school, I'm working a regular job, I can do this. I'm a
Yeah.
woman. I felt fully capable and competent that I could be a good mom. And that wasn't what transpired. Like I felt like a terrible mom, and I felt
Mm.
like I was unprepared for what it really looked like taking care of an infant. After having the C-section, being by myself, how they recommend that you not go up and down steps and have to do a lot of work and things,
Yeah.
on your cut. And for me, that wasn't an option. I didn't have anyone to help assist me, so I was, carrying her car seat and stuff by myself up
Mm.
and down. I mean, at this point, I'm essentially operating as a single mother until her dad would come home from off of the road in his travels. And even then, a lot of times fathers aren't sure, how to provide support in
Right.
certain
What to
ways.
do? Yeah.
Yeah, and so for him, especially when I started to react emotionally, where I would just cry uncontrollably, not knowing why, he was unsure of, well, what am I supposed to do here? What type of support am I supposed to give? Or, so when those first 8 weeks, I'm going up and down the steps, I'm going by myself, I'm doing a lot of things on my own, I'm in pain, but on top of that, my daughter would cry. Like there were things going on with her that I didn't know or understand what to look for. She's crying all the time. She had a reverse sleeping schedule. That would mean that instead of the child sleeping at night, the child sleeps through the day. And so you try to, which is that old saying, or when the child starts going to sleep during the day, why they try to wake the child up to try to keep the child up so that they can go to sleep at night so you're not up all night. Well, for her, it wasn't happening. She wasn't functioning that way. And then at night, she was just crying completely. I mean, all night. It was something that I didn't bargain for. It was something that I didn't understand. Like, I kept hearing certain sounds while she would be sleeping. And so I would talk to the doctor and say, I think there's something wrong with her. And so that's important because sometimes there is, something going on with our children and we don't know the answers. And we're saying, hey, I think this may be happening. Later on, it was found out that she had some lung issues going on, which probably contributed to her crying spells. And so I'm not only going through the battle with her, but I'm going through the battle with doctors too, because I know what I'm hearing and I know that I'm not making it up. And so eventually I had to actually demand that, no, I want you to take x-rays of her. So she, at this point now, is becoming a sickly child, which is only adding to my frustration and my anger at this time.
I do have to point out, we always are talking on this podcast about advocacy, and hearing that you had to do that and you did it, especially in a moment of feeling so alone. It's so important for us to know that if we feel something, we know in our gut, we're the only ones there experiencing it, whether it's with our baby or with our own bodies. The fact that you were able to demand that, no, this needs to change, we need an answer, that's inspiring to hear. So thank you for inspiring women to do that. You took the words right out of my mouth, that you were feeling anger. What other things were you feeling at that time?
I felt, and I'm not deeply religious, but I do believe in God, and I felt angry at God. I felt like you gave me this sick child, and I'm having to do all of these things by myself. I was angry at my circumstances. I felt like I didn't make the right choice. I felt like, was it the right thing to do having this child, of being pregnant? I started to question just everything going on around me, my relationship. I mean, everything in my life was a question at this point, and I was extremely angry. And, dealing with all of the things as a mom just made me even angrier.
What made it get you to the point that's like, I need help?
It took me a while to acknowledge that I needed help because I was uninformed. I, one, didn't even know about postpartum depression when I had my daughter. I had no idea that that even existed. No one had ever talked to me about that. That wasn't something that they went over during my pregnancy. Maybe saw a pamphlet in the hospital or something, but it didn't resonate. I didn't know what that was. And so in the beginning, I didn't know that what I was experiencing, that I needed necessarily help. At first, I just thought that, okay, I'm just being emotional. I'm upset. There's some circumstances happening beyond my control. It'll be fine. And then when I started questioning, like, well, maybe I'm not as competent as I thought. Maybe I'm not as capable as I thought, questioning myself in every regard. But when it came down to when I would walk past the stairs, when I would look at the wall, when I would think about dropping her off at a fire station, when I started having those type of thoughts, that was when I said to myself, something isn't right, because I felt like out of all the thoughts that I'm having, these don't seem to be quite normal. Like I shouldn't be having thoughts of harming her. I shouldn't be having thoughts wishing that she just wouldn't be here, or even thoughts of harming myself. Those were the moments where I said, I think there's something happening bigger than what I'm able to explain in this moment.
How long did these last, or about when was it that these thoughts started to trickle into your brain?
I started having thoughts of harming her probably around maybe 3 or 4 months is when I started having those thoughts. And it lasted, I went into a severe mode for well over a year where I would have those type of thoughts, and become considerably close to acting out on those thoughts. And I just remember like the moment where I felt like I'm gonna really throw her against this wall, or I'm gonna throw her down these steps, and I would just sit her in the seat in the middle of the room, and I would leave and go to another room and just shut my door, because that was all I felt like I could do so that I wouldn't act out on the actual thought that I was having. When I went to the doctor, when you go to the doctors and the checkups and they say, "Well, how are you feeling?" And I'd say, "Oh, I'm okay, I'm fine." So for almost a year, I would say I'm fine and everything's okay, except for, the things that were going on with her in terms of her issues that she was having. It's so ironic that even in the midst of that, I still had motherly instinct in terms of just knowing that there seemed like with her crying, or me hearing gargling, that is a sheer gift that
Yeah.
moms have, regardless of the situation. That was the irony about it. After the first year, I finally said something to my OB, and I said, I'm having like thoughts and I'm feeling really bad. I'm feeling down. And I didn't really go into detail about the thoughts I was having. I just expressed that I was feeling depressed. Because at this point, I'm afraid to tell somebody I'm thinking about that, because I don't want to be labeled. I don't want them to call social services. Like I didn't know what the result would be if I said something like that, and I didn't want to be committed or anything like that. So I just I didn't think that it would be safe for me to ever say the thoughts that I was having.
But you were definitely experiencing what we would now call postpartum depression. So is that something that the doctor diagnosed you with once you told them what was going on?
Yeah, she said that she thought I was having a mild case of postpartum depression, and that was when I started to learn about what postpartum depression was and started to do some more research. Had she known that I was having the other thoughts that I was
Right.
having, I'm sure that there would have been something different explained and expressed.
It's eye-opening for me to hear your fear in not wanting to share these thoughts. It's not uncommon, but it's also doesn't have to happen to you. So hearing you say that you would be scared of admitting what you're thinking because social services might come, I mean, that is a heavy burden to bear. And so it's just really inspiring to hear you say that so that the women who are listening can know this is not about social services. This is not about your baby being taken away, but in fact, it's about taking care of yourself and being open and honest and vulnerable as soon as those ideas start to creep in. Because, yes, it is somewhat common, but you don't have to be suffering, and you especially don't have to be suffering for this long. So, after you told your doctor these things and withheld a little bit of information, what did she do?
Her first thing she did was prescribe me Zoloft,
Mm-hmm.
and I was unwilling to even consider taking an antidepressant at that time in my life. I was raised to consider that type of treatment as not an option. In hindsight, I feel like that would have been an admission of some sort of guilt. It would have been an admission that there is something wrong with me. And I was not in a place of accepting, let alone admitting that there was something wrong with me or wrong with my mind. And so I took the prescription and never got it filled and went home still left untreated. I should have been more expressive because as you mentioned, it really is for the safety of yourself to talk to someone, to tell someone. And if you don't want to start with the doctor, to tell someone close to you in your life that you're having these feelings. And, for me, when I first did express something to one of my family members, their first statement was, well, you're not the only mother in the world.
Mm.
Um, and so when that's
That
the
lack of
response,
validation.
yeah, so
Yeah.
now you're already thinking like, okay, well, I'm not the only mom in the world, so surely I must be able to pull myself up by the bootstrap and get over it.
Yeah. I think it's important for us to touch quickly on there's three different types of experiences that you can have postpartum, and they're all very different, but each of them I think is important to share with whether it's a doctor, your pediatrician, a close friend, a therapist, whatever. The first one is baby blues. That's a little bit more just sadness and moodiness, only lasting about 2 weeks or so. Then there's what we're
Hmm.
talking about today, which is postpartum depression that can last months or even, like with your experience, year or more. And then there's an extreme version, which is postpartum psychosis, which is considered more of a serious mental illness that, is going to be further acting on different things and how you feel. And I would almost assume that if you hadn't found ways to carefully manage the experiences and the symptoms that you were going through, that you could have truly been experiencing postpartum psychosis. So, how did you manage? What did you do? How did you move through this?
For me, it looks untraditional because I refused to take the medication. I didn't have that treatment. And so I continued to suffer longer than what I know that I probably could have. I do think that if I had been more open to a form of treatment or to some form of therapy, because therapy wasn't the first suggestion, also. So her first
Right. It should have
suggestion,
been.
right, her first suggestion was the
Zoloft.
antidepressant. I
Yeah.
didn't even think about it from a therapy standpoint. at all, nor was that suggested to me. And it's important, that a lot of mothers know, like, about the variety of different options and treatment that you can start off with, because sometimes, if you are uninformed, if you don't know, if you are a first-time mom, you're not sometimes thinking of those things. And sometimes if you're not with a culturally competent doctor, or just someone who is looking to get you out in 10 minutes, you may not have the conversation that you need to have. It literally was the sheer strength of me trying to reprogram my mind and like do everything that I can in my power not to act on those thoughts that really just started to kind of get me out of that space. And the one thing that really started to just really transcend the experience was a time my daughter and I, we were driving, and we passed a fatal accident. And it just was one of those accidents where you just knew, you felt it. It was terrible. All of the highway was pretty much shut down. As we finally passed it, I looked over and saw cars that were just completely wiped out. And I thought to myself, what if that was us? What if we had gotten in that car accident? And in that moment, I said to myself, God, if that ever happens to me, let her live and take my life, and let her have a good life. And that was the first moment that I ever felt that I was a mom, that I felt
Yeah.
connected, that I felt any sense of love that I didn't even think that I had. I
Mm.
knew that I loved her, like I felt like there was love there, but I just couldn't feel the emotion of it. But in feeling the possibility of her truly dying in a tragic way, or her not being there, and me wanting to sacrifice my life for the sake of her own, was the moment that really started to change for me in terms of having a connection, of having different views and thoughts of what motherhood really looked like for me.
And then what did life look like on the other side?
It still was work. It wasn't instantaneous, but I was more open to one, addressing, how I was feeling, and two, working on the thing. Like, we don't talk about, I was already predisposed, to depression before having my daughter. And that's
Mm.
something that we don't acknowledge, and something that we don't think about as moms, is that who we were before we became a mom. And who I was before I became a mom was already someone who had dealt with depression and anxiety prior, but never thought that it would take place in my pregnancy. Again, not being aware of what mental health really looked like. So I had to start working on the issues that I already had existing before I even became a mother. And because I also grew up in a household that was not affectionate, and my daughter, who was a very touchy-feely child, and to this day is extremely affectionate, I had to work on what it was within me that didn't
Yeah.
like that,
What did
that
that
didn't
look
like
like?
her.
Yeah.
Yeah, what did love look like for me?
Mm.
And what did it look like showing affection to this being who wanted to be held and touched and loved? I had no clue. And so I had to really learn. And the irony is, she has really like shown me what that has looked like. And even to this day, she takes her hugs, or she'll ask me, she'll be like, oh, okay, mommy, I want a hug. She just always wants hugs. She
Wow,
wants
that's
this
so
type of
beautiful.
love. And so those, were things that I really had to start learning, that I
Yeah.
had to start doing, that I had to start acknowledging, that I had to start owning and working on. And eventually I did start going to therapy on a regular basis and really practicing things for myself. I didn't start getting into the mindset of like, I have to be well in order for her to be well, until much later. And that really had to become my mantra. Like, I have to be well in order
Yeah.
for me to be a better mom.
Oh my goodness, Sasha, that's just so stunning to hear. It's almost like that little girl was made and brought into your life to soften your heart, to open you up, and to teach you such an unbelievable life lesson.
Yeah.
It's like she turned a mirror onto you and your life and how you needed to grow, not only as a mom, but as a woman.
Absolutely. And she made me reflect on things that I thought that I was healed from, that I wasn't.
Yeah.
Because, we also don't think about how we grew up, whether you were abused physically, emotionally. I mean, there's so many components
So
that
much to
matter.
unpack.
Yeah. And they matter when you are bringing life into this world, because you can think that, that whatever may have happened to you, or whatever your experience was, well, that was a past experience. but it comes up in your present, in your future when you are raising children because it's sometimes familiarity of what you know.
Yeah. If you could go back in time, what would you have done differently?
I would have definitely, prepared myself better in terms of one, informing myself with more knowledge about what happens after pregnancy, more than just like, oh, you're raising a kid, but like what really happens with your body, what really happens sometimes with your mind. I definitely would have just gained some more knowledge about that. And I would have started to really create a support system of looking to see if there were any type of groups that I could be a part of, any type of mom groups, if there was just any other resources for me. And at the time, when I did finally start looking for that, there wasn't a lot that existed during that time for me in my area. But I would have just started, having more conversations with other women, with other moms, with trying to create more network or resources of friends or, tapping into people, even if they didn't have a child, but just tapping into someone, who could be there for me. And I didn't think that, I needed to be that prepared or to do that, but you do. You need to have a community. You need to have a support system. It doesn't have to be a lot of people, but I would recommend that it does have to be at least someone that you can talk to during that time and that transition in your life.
Absolutely. So, the beauty of the hardships that we go through is that they can often turn into amazing things for other people, and we can turn them into good, which is exactly what you did. And you are the founder of Partum Evolution. Share with us what this is and how women who are listening might be able to get that community that you're speaking of in a way that is just so specific and so needed today.
Absolutely. So Partum Evolution is my nonprofit, and it offers a place of relatability and community for moms who are at risk or have experienced a postpartum mood disorder. And so the purpose is to basically show that you can overcome postpartum depression and that you can thrive afterward. And so what we work to do is to really highlight the prevalence of perinatal mood disorders, especially in communities of color. And we shed light on the experiences of women during their pregnancy and their birthing journeys, and we try to create a safe space for moms to have conversations, to build connections, to form a community. And just really, we want to impact globally. We want to globally empower moms by increasing the awareness and treatment and prevention of postpartum mood disorders. We are really working hard to incorporate a lot of different programming to help moms, and especially, as I mentioned, especially moms of color who, there's a lot of disparities and a lot of times in those communities where mental health is not talked about at all. And it's something that you don't mention. And so we really want to shed light in underserved communities as well who are not getting the access to health care that they need. And so we just want to create an ongoing community for moms everywhere to really create a safe space and a place where they can receive resources, they can receive different services that will help them through that time, and be able to have someone that they can turn to and who offers relatability.
Absolutely. And the resources don't have to come at a high price. You have a free course. You want to share that as well?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for reminding me. I do.
Yeah.
So anybody, you can go to the website at partumevolution.org, and when you see the tab course, it's a free course, Managing Postpartum Depression. It's an audio course as well, so you don't have to read anything or click through anything online, but you can just listen, and I walk you
Mm,
through all of the stages of postpartum, what it looks like, how you can maintain, how you can get through it, resources that you can go to, places that you can go, and you can download that for absolutely free.
it's so amazing. You're also creating a documentary that I can't wait to hear more about. It's in the process, right?
It is, it is. I went
Yeah.
around the country filming different
Oh,
women and their stories of their postpartum experience.
amazing.
And everyone's story is different. I mean, it doesn't always look like wanting to harm your child. It could look like you having OCD. It could look like you having severe anxiety. I mean, there's so many different stories that are not only interesting, but necessary to hear and understand that they exist. And so there's a lot of footage that I have to go through, and I'm working really hard to put that together. But, it costs, and so we're working on
Yeah,
trying to raise donations for the organization so that we can finalize that documentary and really put it out there to help women around the country, around the world, hopefully, to really just start having the conversation, because really that's where it starts. I mean, we just have to
absolutely.
really start having the conversation about it and what our experiences are as moms. And a lot of times we're not doing that.
Well, all the links to connect with you, to find the birth course, to donate to the documentary, we'll put those in the show notes so people can easily access them. It's really empowering that you've become this mental health advocate for women of color, for mothers, truly through what you experienced. So, what would you say to an expecting mom right now? What do they need to know before they give birth?
The first thing I would say is acknowledge who you are. Really take a moment to acknowledge who you are and begin to understand and unpack the layers that come with you and that come with your experience as a person, as a woman. Like, you have to first understand that as you transition into motherhood, because that doesn't go anywhere. You're not just a mom just because you have a child. Like, there was someone there before that child came, and you need to know that woman and know what she needs and who she is. And the other thing I'd say is that no matter what happens, no matter what the experience is, good, bad, or indifferent, never forget that you are enough, and believe that those moments that I question my capability, my competency, you are enough. You are enough, and you are designated to lead and be this child's mother, and you can and you will be able to get through no matter what the situation or circumstance is. Like, you are fully capable and competent, and you are enough to be that child's mom and to be a great mom. Don't ever think that you can't be, or that if you feel postpartum that this automatically cancels you out from having that, because that's not true. And you can do that.
So, the most important thing for you to do if you start experiencing thoughts like Sasha is to tell someone. If that is you and you have been feeling low for longer than 2 weeks, or have thoughts of hurting yourself or your baby or your future baby, I am here to get support for you, and I want to help you. Send an email to me, Jessica, at info@mamasintraining.com, and I will personally connect you with someone who can guide you through your journey. Sasha's story is so rich, raw, and vulnerable, and I hope it encourages you to realize the importance of sharing that vulnerability, as well as the importance of community. As Sasha mentioned, community in multiple forms is essential for us to know when we might need that next level of support. When we hear stories from other women, we hold up a mirror to ourselves and we see more clearly. Do you have your community of support lined up? If not, we're here to change that. Join us in the free Facebook group Mamas in Training, and I will personally connect you with a mom who has been there and can guide you through what you're feeling. It's as simple as clicking on the link in the show notes. Remember, you don't have to do this alone. We are in this together. If you enjoyed the show today, new episodes release every Wednesday, so be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you don't miss an episode. And help us grow our mama community by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. That way I know how to better serve you. And finally, I would love to connect on Instagram. You can find me at Mamas in Training Pod. That's MAMAS in Training POD. For Mamas in Training, I'm Jessica Lorian. We're in this together.